Welcome back to the fall 1917 turn of my Paths of Glory playthrough. Uh, things are not looking great for the Central Powers. That's all that can really be said when it's really examined here. They managed to get some replacements in and got some cores because they had no replacements in the reserve box, so that was not good. But they're going to have two hands now to look at. We can examine the Central Powers have like 4 cards left from their draw pile, so that means next turn they'll have to shuffle. The Allies actually already got a shuffle in. They only got to draw 1 card from the deck, though. So, finishing off the last stack, and this card's left over from last turn, Air Superiority. Mine Attack. Nice, because it gets the +1 die roll modifier, so this could actually be very good. Army of the Orient, an interesting one. I'm not sure what to do with it. It's a 5 card, which is really great. Brings in the Army of the Orient down here in Salonika. It's a French army. It could be used to break through in Sofia. I don't know if it would be worth it to do. It may be better just to play it for the ops. I mean, it can't hurt. They could always go up to Sofia and then Belgrade and then maybe help the Russians out, but otherwise there's not a, or maybe march through into Constantinople by the land, over by land. So, it might come out, but we'll have to see. Cloak and Dagger. This one's nice. Still get to use the points. Get to see the hand. Severe Weather. Probably won't get to use it because we probably won't be defending, but you never know. Maud. I don't think this will get used either because we're not going to be attacking in the Near East, I don't believe. Likely. Russian Cavalry also probably won't get played. Probably be used for an SR since it has that 4 for the SR. Central Powers now. Leftover cards from last turn. The Turkish reinforcements may or may not come out. Russian Desertion. Such a good card. It's optional, so you may have never seen it before. But it can only be played after the fall of the Tsar, which we threw that card away prematurely, which we really shouldn't have done. But it says CP may reduce 4 2-step Russian units. I mean, that's just brutal. That would really put the Russians out of commission, at least for a couple of turns. So really sad that we got rid of that. I knew it would happen. I knew as soon as we got rid of Fall of the Tsar that we would be able to play it. But something at the time told me to do it. German reinforcements, 9th Army. We'll definitely be playing a reinforcement card. Severe Weather, which might be useful. The Alpenkorps, you never know. Fortified machine guns definitely will be used in defense. And then this is the reinforcement card we'll probably play because it gets a core as well. So I was hoping we might get one of these to help bolster up. And I'll go ahead and do the roll for the mandated offensives. It's going to be 6 for the Allies, for the Central Powers, which is a none, and 1 for the Allies, which is going to be French mutiny again. So they're going to have to take a penalty if they want to attack with any French units. So that'll make them second guess that attack in Aachen. It's probably worth it, just because they don't want to give the Germans any time to rebuild. And even though I don't see how much of a point it is, because they're going to be way down in the victory points by the end of this turn. But that is beside the point. So it'll be over to the Central Powers to start off. And they've got a tall mountain to climb here. The Germans played their reinforcement card, brought in the 12th Army in Essen, as well as a corps that went to the reserve box. And then the Allies played a 3-point card to do 3 things. First off, it's going to be a move down here in Genoa. I've got it on the attack side, but it should be on the move side. And they're going to move 1, 2, 3 down through Italy, taking Bologna and Florence on their way. That'll bring the victory points down to 8, from 10 to 8. So they're slowly going to recapture Italy, liberate it. And the other's going to be up here in the north. An attack on Aachen. Now, because the French are not stacked with a U.S. unit, sorry, it's a little jerky, they're going to give a victory point up, so it'll go from 8 to 9. 9 victory points now, but it's something they're still in their victory part of the track, so they're not too concerned about that. They've given away 2 on it now, so maybe, then that starts to add up. But they really don't want this 12th Army getting into Aachen with that 2 level trench there, because then it makes it more difficult to punch through, and then you just have tons of forces just sitting around in what would be a bloodier than necessary attack that would happen. So they're going to just go ahead and do it this way. So it's going to be a total of 12 from the British and 9 from the the French, which will put them well above the 16 needed. And then it'll just be the defending units here, which total strength of 6, a full strength army, the first army, and a reduced corps. So it'll be 16 plus against 6 with a 2-level fort, which is the first 2-level entrenchment, which I've never had to do before. So that'll be fun. It just moves the offensive fire level 1 extra to the right, ensuring it'll be a little bit bloodier, and it's already bloody enough. I will say that I like in an actual game. Remember, you can't roll the dice and then look at your hand and choose combat cards. I had that issue in Empire of the Sun, but when you're dealing with all this, you're not talking to you and managing 2 hands. You're not thinking about all this stuff. So the Germans could play fortified machine guns, which adds a +1 die roll modifier to a entrenched space. And just looking at it, the other entrenched areas are in Insterburg over in East Prussia, and then Budapest and Vienna. So of those, which is the most important? Well, this is the most lopsided. So they don't want to roll low. If they have the opportunity to move it over 2 and they roll good, they can get a 7, which means they can't lose the attack. So they want to guarantee that they get a 7. So adding that 1 is pretty good. Now, they, of course, could use it in other areas, but this is a very important one, because if it breaks, it's just, they know they're going to sustain high losses in this one, so they don't want to have to sustain high losses and then take another loss in order to not have to retreat. So they're going to play fortified machine guns. Now, in reality, they don't. I'm trying to pretend that I don't know I've already rolled a 6. So in the end, this is going to be useless. But I think because they're going to win, they should be able to keep it. So anyways, they're going to play that combat card. And looking at the allies, they have 1 combat card they can use. Well, they have this entrenched attack versus an entrenched CP defender, and can only be used once in 1 combat per turn. So they could play this mine attack to get a +1 themselves, which they'll do. So they're both going to have a combat card that will increase the die roll modifier for the allies, which put them up to a 5, and they're already at a 6, so they can't do anymore. So it's going to be bloody. So let's take a look here on the army fire table. 16 plus with a 5 will be a 7. It's going to be shifted 1 over, so it's still a 7. 6 to 8, they did a 6. It's going to be shifted over 2, which is also a 7. So 7 losses inflicted each, which means that the allies will have to get rid of their combat card, because they lose or they don't win. And the defenders, I believe, can keep it because they didn't lose. I don't think you have to. If it's a tie, it goes to the defender. So I think it's still theirs to keep. I think they can still hold on to it. So they have to inflict 7 losses now. It's going to be 3, 6, and then they'll reduce that core, get rid of it, for the 7th one. So they'll have a full strength core still in Aachen, and then the allies will have to lose 7. So they'll lose 3, from the 5th Army. And 3 from the British 5th Army. And that'll be 6. They can't do the 7th, so it gets ignored. They don't attack in, they don't advance in because they did not get more than the defenders did. So the position holds, but they at least got rid of that army, which means when they move in next, it'll be at least a little bit better for the attacking roles there. So it'll be over to the Central Powers now, who will likely move in and further hold on to the Western Front. So the Germans, in fact, moved in from Essen into Aachen, and then moved a Austrian army down into Trieste just to seal that up in case the Americans got any ideas about getting an easy victory point. Big 4-point card comes out now, and it's going to be involving a couple of things. First of all, the Serbians, way over here, haven't heard about them in a while, are going to march back into Belgrade and retake the capital. You know, it really does confuse me when you study the First World War, and I won't spend much time talking about this, but it's just something interesting and a bit more intellectual than me just pushing counters around. When Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated, the Austrians issue an ultimatum to the Serbians. And nowhere in there is there anything about ceding territory to the Austrians. All they want is to put down the Serbians, to put down the groups that are causing these terrorist attacks and causing unrest in the empire. They want them to be responsible about hunting down the people who killed them. I mean, honestly, if you look at it, it's really not all that bad. But I think it's kind of viewed as, you know, oh, they'll never accept this. You know, it's just viewed as terrible. And then they do accept it. And I can only imagine being the Serbians in all of this. I mean, you know, I don't think they could have known what they were spawning off with the war. I'm sure they thought it was going to be another Balkans war, as there had been previously. But I just can't imagine being in their situation. They accept the ultimatum. I don't think it's that unreasonable. There's nothing in there that would make me think that this is such a terrible thing that, you know, there's no way they would accept it. So there's often an idea that this is just a big move by them to do that. But I always wonder if the Serbians, in the actions they took, knew what they were doing, because, you know, at certain points in the war, you know, Belgrade falls. That's really what the whole war was about to start off with. It becomes much more than that. But at the beginning, Serbia falls. And the war really could have ended in 1916, you know, but it continues to go on because it had transformed, not just from this regional conflict, but to a world conflict. And just from that perspective, it's very interesting to me. But anyways, they retake their capital, and we're down to 8 victory points now. The French will march through Rome and into Naples, shooting a control marker into the replaceable box. That is 1, 2, 3. They'll move back to Rome. That means that the Italian units can come back in now. At the end of the turn, there are a lot of them. So I don't think that this is the responsibility of the Americans and the French to pursue the war in the Alps. I think that's the responsibility of the Italians. And once they get some units onto the board, they can do that and kind of pull their own weight there again. Because any U.S. units, I think I'm going to dump into the Western Front rather than down here in Italy. But that is half of it. The other half will be another plunge, once more into the breach here in Aachen. Still going to be well above that 16-plus column for the Allies, and the Germans will have, rather than 6, they'll have 7 strength points this time, which keeps them in that same column, not a big deal. They'll have their combat card from last time, and the Allies are going to play air superiority, which will give them a +1. just the same as last time. So it will be same odds as last time, except the Germans have 7 rather than 6, but it still keeps them in the same column, so it's not a big deal. Plus 1 die roll modifier for both sides. And the roll is very one-sided. 6-2, pushed up to a 3. And the Allies obviously can't go above a 6. So on the table, a 16 here, or a 6 will be moved over 1, still a 7. For the Central Powers, it's going to be a 3, but it's moved over 2 to a 5. So they're going to do 5 this time, which is unfortunate because they're going to lose some of that. The French are going to take it. Third Army is reduced. And the other 2 can't be dealt. And then they'll have to sustain 7 themselves, the Germans. 3. You could do 4, 5, but you have to do as many as you can. So it'll be 6 to eliminate that army. Bring on a new corps. And then the 7th one can come from this corps. And so it'll be 2 corps, 1 reduced, 1 full strength. And the Allies do win this attack. So now the question is, will they retreat? They obviously don't want to. They could take a step loss and could stay there with 1 full strength corps. And you can basically guarantee they'll just hop in again and batter their way through at some point. So, yeah, I think they'll stay. I don't know if you have to reduce the trench when the trenches get reduced a level. That may have already been needed to. It wouldn't have affected the combat, so it's not a big deal. But let's just take a look in here. Trenches remain in space until enemy unit enters. If enemy unit enters space with level 1, the trench is removed. If an enemy unit enters a space with a friendly level 2, that is reduced by 1. If a space with a level 1 trench suffers attrition, the marker is removed. 2, it goes down. Yada, yada, yada. So nothing about that. So they can just take the step loss and keep the trench there. So they'll get rid of that corps and stay in Aachen. They've survived 2 attacks. I don't think they will survive a 3rd. And there's nowhere to pull help from. There really isn't. Because all the armies are tied up or eliminated. A lot of them are eliminated. So I think that the 3rd time knocking will break the German resistance, and then the British can just rampage their way through Germany. And if Berlin falls by the end of this turn, the beginning of next, you can't imagine in reality that the war would continue on. Like I said, they're currently at 8 victory points. 2 more, 3 more would put them down to 5. Then you start adding up maybe a few more anyways. It doesn't look great for them. But that'll do it for the Allies. Now over to the Central Powers again. Alright, so that brings us to the end of the fall turn. The 2 sides pretty much just played out some replacement points. Here, as you can see, a couple of cards back and forth, 2 each, I believe, to just get some extra troops in. The turn was winding down. They decided not to do a 3rd attack on Aachen, because then they wouldn't have as many forces there. The Germans would have time to build up. So they decided to take the replacement points, rebuild their forces, and go out again next turn. Same thing with the Germans. Nothing they can do at this point besides get some more troops on the board, because there are enough there that if they can effectively get them back on the map, then that's the only way they can win. Like, they can bunker down, sure, but they're not going to win. They just don't have enough troops. They're operating with 2 full-strength armies, 3 full-strength armies, compared to more than that by, the French, which is just, not feasible. So, they're going to have to get troops on the board. That's their only means of winning at this point. So the only thing left to do on this turn, of course I'm going to combine this with the winter 1918 turn, is to roll for the siege phase. No attrition or anything like that, so I'm just going to go ahead and roll 4, 5, or 6, and Metz will fall. And it's a 5. Oops, there you go. It's a 5. So Metz, Fort and Metz will fall, which means that they'll drop the victory point marker down one more. It's a 7. 7 victory points. Now, it's a huge swing, just over a matter of a couple of turns. And 1917 turns out to be the breakthrough year, as it really was historically, for the Allies. So now we wind into 1918, the last full year of the war, the last year of the war historically. And we will keep on plowing on with some new troops for both sides and see where it takes us. All right, winter 1918. Got the side set up here for the final year of the war, final full year. And here's the hands for both the sides. First off, the Allies. Still working through. They had the reshuffle last turn. A Royal Tank Corps, which we can't play because we haven't played land ships. The Kerensky Offensive, can't play because there hasn't been Fall of the Tsar. USA Reinforcements, which is nice. Udinich, believe we either held this one or it got shuffled back in, I forget. Great Retreat, which probably won't be used. Grand Fleet, just in case. And Everyone into Battle, which I like, but it can't be played yet because we haven't played any of these three, Blucher, Michel, or Peace Offensive. But this is a very good event, if that were the case. And then for the Central Powers, they get Bolshevik Revolution, which of course can't be played because Fall of the Tsar hasn't happened. Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which of course can't happen. Van Francois, seen it a few times. Polish Restoration, got this one earlier. Unlikely that it will be used, but it might be. Another German reinforcement card, very important. Entrench, the requirement for this has obviously already been met, but and then Russian desertions. They held on to this one because the hope is they just got a reshuffle. So the Fall of the Tsar is in there somewhere. If they can get that card out within the next couple of turns, then they can, kind of steamroll everything through and very quickly have the Russian falls. So, we'll have to see if that comes up. It's probably been shuffled into the bottom of the deck because that's how it works. But you never know. So it's going to be difficult to hold on to all those cards, but they're going to try. They're not going to have a lot to do anyways. So I'm going to roll for the mandated offensives. 3s for each, so it's going to be the British and the Turks. So the Ottomans and the British for the mandated offensive. Alright, over to the Central Powers. Central Powers on their turn will move this army in to Aachen, just to bolster things up. But they're also going to do an attack in the east. They're going to have this dual-pronged attack, the two 11th armies, taking the Russian 8th in Lodz. Haven't done an offensive action with them, with the Germans at least, for a little while. But when you start to run out of places to put units in the west, you can start to free up units here and perhaps can capitalize on the fact that the Allies have left some gaps open because you are so weak. So it's going to be 8 against 3. No die roll modifiers. 3-1. A 3 on the 3 will be 2. A 1 on the 5 will be 2. So a stalemate here. They'll both have to take a step loss, and nobody will advance in. Oops. But that's not too concerning. It's a knock on the door that the Russians will have to answer because they just can't afford to let themselves be caught up in the rear. But they do have two full-strength armies waiting in Moscow. So that might not end well for the Germans if they just SR those two units straight to Lodz and then punch through the middle, which is probably what the Russians will do now. If you're going to poke the bear, they're going to come back and bite you. So over to the Allies now. So the Germans entrenched in the east, the Russians SR'd some units. Now we're over here in the west, and just want to make one quick correction. This combat card, as far as I can tell, they go from turn to turn. Like as long as they keep staying in until you lose a combat. If so, they should have gotten a +1, which would have given them one more loss factor, which would have eliminated that core. So that's not a huge effect, even if it's wrong. But just to clear that up. So they're going to do this attack again. They're well over the 16 needed. And the Germans have a total strength of 8. So they're still in that 6 to 8 column, which is good for the Allies. So here comes the roll. And it's a bad one for the Germans. 5 and a 1. A 1 on the 6 to 8 is modified 2 times to the 4. And the Allies have their roll of a 5 modified 2 down, but it's still a 7. So they have to take 4, but they deal 7. So they're going to reduce the French again. And then they'll have to reduce 7 here. So it's 3, 6, bring a core from the reserve box, 7. Now they can ignore the retreat because they're in a hex, but they have to take a step loss for it, I believe. So they will do that. So really it's just a matter of time now here. Because there's nothing they can do to stop these hordes of Allied units just continuing to pile on. It's just not possible. So I think maybe one last attack might do it, or it might take 2. Just depends on whether or not the Allies will want to do it this turn or not. Because they have some other things they want to do, plus they're kind of running low on all of their options. Just want to clean up a mistake here. I just remembered, you've probably already caught it by now, that you can't attack from 2 different nationalities from 2 different spaces. There has to be one space where the units are stacked of the same nationality. I did this earlier with the Germans and the Austrians and Italy. Just want to make sure that this can't be done here. I think I also did it in Italy now that I think about it. I think I also attacked with 2 nationalities, the Americans and the French, without them being stacked together. So that was a mistake as well. But I try and fix things if I catch them. So I'm going to fix this by undoing the attack. I revamped the 8th and the 11th Army. I'm going to use those points instead to try and entrench in both those spaces, just because that's an easy way I can fix that. So for the Austrians, they're not going to be able to. The Germans will not either after the rolls. But that was a couple turns ago. So that'll serve for last turn. The last time that this happened, just to correct that. This turn, the Germans are going to SR the 11th Army to Aachen. That's probably what they should have done to start with, rather than leave it in Breslau. But I'm going to do this because all of these forts protect the interior, basically protect Berlin from the Russians getting in one turn. They can't just march straight through because they won't have supply. They'll have to take an attrition loss, which they don't want to have to do. So they're protected at least for a turn. So even if those 2 forts fall, Berlin will be safe until next turn. then they don't really want Aachen to fall. So corrected that mistake and ran through the German turn. Alright, on the penultimate card here for the Allies, they're going to do a big 4-point operation. Firstly, the British units in Cairo are just going to advance up to Port Said to retake it. Get a victory point down to 5 now. Cut off the Turkish units in Alexandria. They'll likely retreat, but it doesn't really matter. They're not too worried about containing them. The other part of this will be here in Poland. Excuse all of the drinking. It's going to be the 8th, 9th, and 10th German armies. Sorry, Russian. Against just the single 11th Austrian army. They're going to be getting a +2 though because of the fort. But nothing else. They could just not manage to entrench because of that low loss factor. So it'll be 9 against 5. The roll is not great for the Allies, for the Central Powers, I mean. And it'll be a 9 for the Russians, and a 5 is a 5. And on the 5, a 1, I believe it was, yes. A 1 is a 2. So they'll take 5, but deal 2. Very unfortunate. Those trenches are really important. So they'll deal 2, which is enough to reduce an army. Because the Russians have such a low loss factor. So they'll reduce the 10th. And then this will get reduced to 7. So it's 2, 4, and I don't think the forts take hits. I don't remember if you can like deal some of these attacks on the fort to damage it. I don't remember. But they still have 2 more to deal out. Because that was 2, 4, or 3 more. 2, 4, 5, 6, 7. And they will definitely have to retreat. They'll have to retreat 2 spaces. And so they'll go back to Berlin. The Russians can advance in with everyone except the reduced unit in that space is now besieged. So they'll likely do the same thing to Breslau and Danzig as well, just because they're not going to be opposed. So they might as well. And it's definitely spelling trouble for the Central Powers. And then the last bit of this is on the Western Front, this standard attack that you've become so used to at this point. Still well with over the 16, or just over the 16. And the Germans are at 8, I believe. Because a reduced army, yeah. So 8, they're still in that same column that they've been stuck in. So it'll be the same attack we've seen this whole time. Low numbers. 2 and a 1. Army fire table. Under the 8, a 2. Moved over to a 4. And a 1 will be moved down to a 4. So, once again, as far as I understand, you can reduce I really wish it was you had to reduce all unreduced units, because it just gives me a headache, having to, obviously you want to reduce unreduced units so you still have full strength units, but, because I'll have to do it here because I have to take the full losses, I have to take the full 4. If I flip this one, I can't do that, so I guess that's why they did it. But that'll be 3. And then that'll be 4. And the Allies themselves will have to take 4. And they're actually going to fill up this British army because they're going to be taking some replacements. And they don't want them all to be on the French. So, cracks continue to show. The question now will be whether they forego those replacements, which probably isn't the wisest decision. But if they forego those replacements to try and break through before the Allies have a chance, or the Central Powers have a chance to play a replacement card and get some reinforcements in. Alright, so the final card play on the winter 1918 turn. Let me take you through what's going on here. The Ottomans fulfilled their mandated offensive in the east. Last card play, I was going to take it as a replacement action, but I think I've changed my mind because they're sitting on 5 victory points right now. One of them is going to be lost because of the blockade, so they're at 4. If they could turn 4 victory points by the end of the turn, then they win. At the end, it won't even matter. So they're going to move 2 armies here. They're going to move the 10th Army to Breslau, the 9th Army to Danzig. All of those will be besieged. So that's a possibility of 3 victory points. The rolls have to go your way, obviously, so it's not guaranteed. Then, in Egypt, they're going to do an attack, trying to retake Alexandria. 2 against a 1 here on the core fire table, so not a lot. It's going to be a 3 and a 4, which on the core fire table, a 1, a 3 is nothing, on the 2, a 4 is 1. So that will be enough. They will take 1 step loss, have to retreat 1 space into Libya, and then the British will retake Alexandria, pushing the victory points now down to 4. So if the 3 forts fall, that's enough. But just to pad things, they're also going to attack here in Trent on this Austrian corps, because the odds aren't great on this one, but I'm not too concerned about that because the game's pretty much in the bag, but just a matter of getting it across the line and not having to wait another turn to do it. So it's going to be 3 against 4. Actually, the Austrians have a advantage thanks to the fort in Trent that was not destroyed, unfortunately. So 4 and a 3 is only a couple of situations in which this works. I went ahead and calculated it all out. I don't know if this will be the situation they need. So a 4 on the core fire table, and a roll of a 3 will be shifted over 1 because of the mountain. The mountain hex gives you an offensive fire shift column of 1. So that 3 goes to 2 losses on the 5. The army is a 3, and they roll a 4, which is exactly what they needed. So that works out perfectly. So they're going to deal 3 and only take 2. They can't take the 2, obviously, but they can deal the 4. 1, 2. You have 1 core here. 3, 4, and it's eliminated. I don't know if you have to take replacements, like if you have to take from the reserve box, or if you can just eliminate the unit without having to do so. I honestly don't know. So actually the one thing I didn't think about is reduced units can't move in. I don't know if that means only from this attack or what, but I won't move it just in case. It's not too big of a deal. But I didn't think about that just off the top of my head. It's fine. They'll just move in next turn and make their way in. But so that's it for this turn. We're going to go to the attrition phase, which there is none, and then we'll do the siege phase. I'll have to look and see when that blockade point comes in, because if it comes in after the victory part, then, okay, during the war status phase. Okay, so we'll do the siege phase first before we do this. So these 3 forts, we'll start up top in Danzig. They need a 2 on all of them. Well, they need higher than a 2 on all of them. So 3, 4, 5, or 6. We'll start in Danzig. First one is a 5. This becomes destroyed. Control marker. And the victory points go down to 3. Now for Posen here. I rolled that one literally across the western front. I missed the box. But it doesn't matter as I reconstruct the armies there. It's a 6, so it'll work. That one is destroyed. A control marker is placed. And the victory points now will go to 2. Final one in Breslau. And it rolls out of the box as well, but it's a 4. All 3 of the forts fall, which means the victory points will go down to 1. And then the blockade will cause that final point to go down into 0, which means it is an automatic victory for the Allies, and this game is over. Well, let's go ahead and get you the full picture here, and we'll go over all the fronts. So, in the West, the French managed to make their way into Germany, avenging their losses in the Franco-Prussian War. The Germans were pushed back into their own territory, didn't even get a historical success there as they did during the war. In Italy, pretty much a stalemate. The Italians are non-existent. The Americans and the French came to their aid. Where it all started, the Serbians are at the status quo. The Bulgarians have managed to get themselves tangled up. In the Near East, not much has changed. But the Ottomans will likely fall. They didn't get as bad historically as they were. In Austria, can certainly spell the end for the empire, because half of it has been conquered by the Russians, and it will fall. And then in the East, German territory conquered by the Russians as well. So overall, what a game. I've only played this game once. This was my first playthrough. But I absolutely love it. I immediately want to go and play it again. It's just so well done. Everything about it is perfect. Just about. I think that the balance is great. The mechanics are really what get me. The action rounds, the way they work, the different actions you can take. I love this back and forth, the victory points. I've only ever seen that before in Twilight Struggle, how you're not really getting your own victory points, but you're fighting over a swing, which I think is brilliant, and I think works really well for this game. We saw some great swings. I mean, like 2 turns in, they were at 19 victory points, the Central Powers. And then it swings back, and then just 4 turns ago, they were at 19 again and could have won at the beginning of 1917, and now, a year later, the whole thing has collapsed, which just shows you how fragile things were. My playthrough was not perfect, because obviously I made a lot of mistakes. Rules, but also strategy. Should have gone for more replacements. Should have slowed the war down. Should have entrenched on the Western Front heavily. Didn't do a lot, didn't shift enough to the Eastern Front, did not play Fall of the Tsar. If I would have just held on to that card, we would not be in this situation because the Russians are just ridiculous. They have so many armies. I didn't even get all of them on the board. Some of them are, there's still one in the replaceables box, I believe. So, I mean, just, they are incredibly dominant. You have to get them off the board. And I had the cards to do it. I held all three of these cards because I wanted to keep them just in case. I knew that was the only way that the Central Powers had a chance. I didn't worry about replacements on the last turn because I knew that that was useless. The only way is if they managed to get in their hand on the next turn. Let's look at the next 7 cards just to see. So 1, 2, 3, 4. There it is. There it is. So they would have gotten a Fall of the Tsar on the next turn. They would have gotten the victory points for it. And then they couldn't have played the Bolshevik Revolution on this turn. But if they could have survived, then they could have played it. And then the Brest-Litovsk could have been right afterwards. So next 2 turns, they could have managed to, I think, fend the Russians off, get them out of the war. And then it would just be a frenzy on the Western Front. So we really missed an opportunity to see something incredible. But just all of the forts falling at the same time. If that German unit would have stayed in the east, it probably wouldn't have happened. I probably should have thought that 3 victory points was not as bad as the 1 or maybe 2 that they would give up in the west. But, hindsight's 20/20. But I really would have loved to have seen that happen because I thought there was a chance that it would be in there. So I held on to everything, and I don't know if the Germans could have held off 2 turns. They could have held off 1, but I think the Russians probably would have finished it off before we got the opportunity to see that all the way through. So I love the game. I can't wait to play it again. It's obvious that you need to play it a lot. Like, it's kind of like chess in that there's a lot of innuendos and strategies that you learn just from playing it over and over again. I don't even remember what was going on in 1914 and 15, how I could have changed, because that was just such a long time ago. I've played this over the span of months. So, there was a lot going on. And what I know now obviously would affect what was going on then. A lot of different strategic things. And I know the rules better now as well. But it's an absolutely beautiful game. Thank you to everyone who has watched. A lot of views on that first video. And all the people who have stayed with me and commented on all of my rules errors throughout the entirety of it. I made some this time that I caught, and I probably made some that I didn't catch as well. So I just want to thank everybody. I'm going to have to bring up another game next. I've heard For the People suggested. I like that game a lot. I thought about going with a heavier game, because For the People is exactly like Paths of Glory, and it was similar to Empire of the Sun, and then it's a card-driven game. So I might do something a little heavier. Next War Poland I've thought about. I have another World War I game, 1914 Offensive L'Outrance, and I have some other ones as well that I'm thinking about. So I haven't quite decided. Let me know in the comments before I post it, and I thank everybody for watching. It was a lot of fun, and I hope you enjoyed it. As I clean up here, I just found one more mistake that I should mention. I kept talking about how you can't do 2 attacks from different nationalities without them being stacked. Well, I did that like 80 times over here with the British and the French. So that's a really big mistake that I made. So I went back to look and see if there was some way that I could make that okay. And one of those cards that's a prerequisite for, I forget what the card is, the one that allows you to treat units of the different ones of the same nationality. Let me find it here. It might still be in their hands. Yeah, everyone into battle. Allied units in Italy, France, and Belgium are considered. That wouldn't apply for Germany, which is where the French were. So yeah, there's no way really to fix it. But that's obviously a big mistake because I was just drilling away with the Germans, and the French and the British. The one thing that could fix it is just putting a French army with the British army and swapping them. But then you're saying it's double the activation points rather than being 1 in each. It would be 2 in each, so it would have just taken a little bit longer. So I corrected myself on other ones. I don't know why I didn't catch that one, But that's a mistake that I made there at the end. It didn't actually turn out to be that big of a deal because they didn't take the space, and that's not the reason they lost. So I'm not, terribly heartbroken over it, but just I know you guys will probably catch me on it in the comments, but just want to fess up to that was a mistake I made, and I apologize for it.